Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah chapter 5, Halacha 3. This is one of my favorite Mishnahs and Gemaras in this Masechet. It's really interesting, and it really plays off on what just happened with Halacha 2. The Mishnah goes like this. Okay, it's talking about a restriction on the landowner immediately after harvest. Now, there's a lot of crops that will grow and be ready after 60 days, and a lot will be ready after 45 days. There'll be some that are ready after 90 days. So in the good season here, you're going to have a lot of people that want to turn that land, and they want to harvest their crop immediately and plant it with something else before the winter comes. And that way they can get in maybe 3 crops in the year and really get a lot of value out of that land. So the farmers want to turn that land. They want to get it going. They want to get it irrigated as quickly as possible without waiting. So the Mishnah says, one may not irrigate his field to the point that it is dripping wet before the poor collect its leket. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. But the sages permit it, because it is possible to assess the damage caused to the poor and to compensate them. So again, in this story, the harvest, after the harvest, the landowner, he wants to saturate the field in order to soften the ground, prepare it for planting another crop, probably vegetables, and do it really quick. And making the field dripping wet, that's going to, before the poor come and collect the leket, it's going to cause a loss because all the water damage is going to ruin the leket ears, and these leket ears are all over the field, and this is going to make it so that now part of the field is covered with someone else's property, and now you're damaging someone else's property. But the problem is that the farmer's got to get to work. He's got to get his stuff going. The landowner is going to be permitted to saturate his field, but he has to compensate the poor for the loss that they would suffer. Rabbi Meir is saying that the landowner may not saturate the field, even if he suffers a loss, and he's entitled to compensation. He may withhold a portion of the leket equal to the value of the loss that he would do by delaying. So you have a financial gain and loss, and in a way, there's not really going to be a difference between these Tanaim, these Tanaic opinions, because on one opinion, they're saying that if it's like Rabbi Meir, then he's entitled to compensation for the time lost, and he can deduct that from the ears of grain and the leket that belongs to the poor. In the case of the sages, they're saying that you have to compensate them. So in a net, this gain and loss thing, it's actually going to be the same, but the way it's done is going to be different. Everybody agrees that the party suffering the loss has to be compensated. The difference between Rabbi Meir and the Tanna Kama is basically saying that Rabbi Meir entitles the poor to receive actual grain rather than money with which to purchase it, and the sages entitle the landowner to cultivate the field as he sees fit rather than a compensation. There's another difference, says Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in Seif 105 of his Burim. He says that another difference is that Rabbi Meir imposes upon the landowner the trouble of having his loss assessed and collecting compensation, whereas the sages impose the trouble on the poor. So the Gemara is gonna get into about this with the field. It was taught in a brisa regarding one who wishes to drench his field before a poor person has entered it to collect leket, the law is as follows. If his potential loss from postponing the drenching is greater than the loss to the poor for an immediate drenching, he is permitted to drench the field. In other words, if the owner stands to lose money by delaying the drenching until the leket is collected by the poor, then the poor stand to lose if he drenches the field immediately. So even a short postponement can result in a substantial loss to the owner because he can't plant the field, can't get it ready for that next turn. And even, in an area where each landowner has the right to use the communal well on a specific day, it also might cause him to miss his turn and lose an opportunity to drench the field. That's the insight by the Rosh Cirillo about the way the wells worked back then. So he might not just miss his time to get something going for harvest, but he might miss his turn at the well, which might delay him maybe even a week. So you could see a real loss of time. If you have to hurry before the winter comes and you're trying to get in your 3 crops, and each crop is taking 60 days or taking 90 days, delaying it maybe 10 days or 15 days, that's a big problem. And it's really a much bigger loss than the value of the leket. So the ruling is that says the sugya, he is permitted to drench the field, but if the loss to the poor for an immediate drenching is greater than his own loss for the postponement, he is forbidden to drench the field. So we're gonna talk about how this fits in with the Mishnah, which does not distinguish a case which the owner's loss is greater than the loss of the poor. Where the owner's loss is greater, and then there's another case where the loss to the poor is greater. So Rabbi Yehuda says, either way, he may not drench the field while the leket is strewn over it. Rather, he must first collect the leket and place it on the wall, and the poor person comes and takes that which is his. Rabbi Yehuda is pointing out that this is someone else's property. This is not just your field that you can do what you want, and that the landowner has an obligation to spend the time and the effort to collect the other person's property so it doesn't get damaged, and to place it on a wall where he can collect it. Now, this, by the way, protects it so that the leket doesn't get mixed up into any other produce, where we have a problem like what we had before, where something gets mixed. This is a case where the person's respecting the ownership of the property, and he's preserving it, and he's bringing it over and saving it and salvaging it. So in this way, there's no calculation in terms of the person having a loss, either the farmer or the poor person. So the Gemara is going to point out a contradiction, which they're actually going to explain is not really a contradiction. So the opinions, the sugya says, the opinions of Rabbi Yehuda are inconsistent. In this tractate, with respect to somebody who's thinning out his vineyard, which comes up later in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, just as he may thin out his own vines, so too may he thin out from those that are laden with fruit of the poor. So that really does seem like a contradiction. By the way, just as a hint, it's not a contradiction. They're talking about 2 different cases. So over there, Rabbi Yehuda is maintaining that someone is permitted in the course of thinning out the vines to uproot a vine that has oleos, which the poor have not yet collected and which they have a right to from the Torah, even though this is going to result in a loss to the poor on account of oleos possibly going to waste. Rabbi Kanievsky about this sugya says, since the thinning out of the vineyard is a necessary function of cultivation, and failing to do so will have a detrimental effect on the future crop, the owner is not obligated to alter his cultivation schedule in order to allow the poor additional time to collect their entitlements. And that's from the Biur Shir series from Rabbi Kanievsky. So that's one part of it, is that he doesn't have to worry about damaging his harvesting schedule, because this thinning out and culling the vines and trimming the vines, that's also a thing that improves the tree, and that's part of getting the produce to be better. We know that in Shabbos chapter 7 Halacha 2 that all the cases about trimming the vines, the grapevines, and Rashi over there says it improves the quality of the vines, and certainly that coincides with the point of Rabbi Kanievsky. So the question is, can over here, it looks like with drenching the field, Rabbi Yudah is saying that the owner has to delay the drenching in order to protect the interests of the poor, and over there that he's allowed to carry it out. That's what it looks like. So the Gemara is going to answer it and explain it. The sugya reads like this. It says, there, in the case of thinning out the vineyards, the poor caused the loss for themselves, for they had ample time to collect the oleos, and they did not come. And therefore, Rabbi Yudah does not impose upon the owner to postpone his cultivation for their sake. The Gemara continues, says, but here, in the case of the Leket, the poor are surely not at fault, for they came to collect the Leket as soon as it became available, yet the landowner wishes to drench the field immediately. So the Mara Fulda points out that since proceeding with the drenching, the owner would deprive the poor of their only opportunity to collect the Leket, Rabbi Yudah imposes upon the owner the burden to go collect it for them and place it on the wall. And the Gemara's point is to say that this is not a case where the poor people, like in the oleos, went and delayed, and they didn't go and harvest and collect their fruit, and thereby delaying the schedule, the work schedule of the people. This point is talking about a case where on Monday I harvested it, and I harvested it in the morning, and Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning I'm getting ready to drench the field. So maybe the poor didn't even have time to come and do it yet. And that's the difference between this point and that point. So the Gemara wants to point out another apparent contradiction about this opinion by Rabbi Yudah and the opinion about the oleos. So the Gemara reads, the opinions of the rabbis are inconsistent with respect to the law of the landowner who wishes to drench the field while it is strewn with leket. So actually the contradiction is going to, I guess, be with the rabbis. So the Gemara reads, there in the Brisa, they said, if his potential loss for postponing the drenching is greater than the loss to the poor for an immediate drenching, he is permitted to drench the field, but if their potential loss is greater than his, he is forbidden to drench it. Yet here in the Mishnah, they say they categorically permit the owner to irrigate the field until it is dripping wet, with no stipulation that this pertains only if his potential loss is greater than that of the poor. So that's a really, really good point. So how can that be? And the Gemara is going to answer that. And it's going to say that the Brisa does not refer to the same case. They're talking about apples and oranges. So the Gemara reads that there in the Brisa, we're dealing with a case where it is impossible to accurately assess the loss and impose its payment. And therefore, the rabbis rule that whichever party stands to lose more than the other prevails. The Gemara continues, says, but here in the Mishnah, we are dealing with a case where it is possible to accurately assess the loss and impose its payment. And therefore, the rabbis rule that the landowner may irrigate his field only on condition that he compensates the poor for the loss. So I want to bring in a note by the Miri in one of his commentaries. So the Bryce is talking about a case of someone who drenches his field, and the Mishnah, by contrast, says the Miri, saying that one may not irrigate until dripping wet. So the Meiri points out, drenching refers to a fuller saturation than irrigating. One who drenches his field will cause the poor a significant loss, for he will ruin all the leket that is over there. And conversely, when a field is so dry that it needs drenching, failing to perform it causes the landowner a significant loss. Thus, if we would impose upon the landowner to compensate the poor for the damage that results from drenching it, it would not be worth his while to proceed with the drenching. And conversely, we would impose upon them to compensate him for the damage that results from not drenching, if it would be worth their while to take the leket. So therefore, the rabbis rule that all depends on which party stands to lose more. And if the landowner's potential loss is greater than that of the poor, he is permitted to drench the field and is not required to compensate them for the damaged leket. But, says the Meiri, if their potential loss is greater than his, he is forbidden to drench the field while the leket is strewn on it and is not entitled to compensation for any damage of the field. So, just want to continue with his point. The Mishnah refers to the lesser act of irrigating a field until water drips on the surface. And since the field is not inundated with water, the poor do not suffer a very great loss, since much of the leket is not harmed. On the other hand, when a field needs merely to be irrigated, the failure to proceed immediately does not cause the land significant damage. Thus, it is reasonable to either allow the irrigation and have the owner compensate the poor for the minor loss, or forbid it and have the poor compensate him for his minor loss. But the rabbis ruled in the owner's favor, says the Meiri, that he may irrigate as long as he compensates them. Rabbi Meir, says Meiri, rules in favor of the poor. The owner may not irrigate it, but is entitled to be compensated. And the Mara Fulda points out and says that the Mishnah states explicitly that the owner may irrigate because it is possible, meaning that it is possible to assess the loss and to impose a compensation. So those are a lot of very deep insights about the difference between drenching and irrigating, and furthermore, a lot of very deep insights about a halachic thing about the person who stands to lose more and who compensates whom. So yeah, it really is incumbent upon the poor to come and collect, because they may have a case where the amount that's available for being leket gets offset by damages. So the Gemara now wants to get into this dispute between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis in the Mishnah, and then it's going to finish up. So let's talk about compensation. So the Gemara says, now Rabbi Meir states that one may not irrigate his field to the point that it is dripping wet before the poor collect its leket. And according to this opinion, we assess for the owner the loss that he incurs, and the poor must compensate him for it. So the Mara Fulda points out that he is allowed to withhold a measure of leket, according to Rabbi Meir, equal in value to his loss. And although Rabbi Meir does not mention anything about compensation in the Mishnah, the Gemara informs us that he agrees the owner is entitled to it, just as the rabbis who permit the heavy irrigation award compensation to the poor. So the Gemara continues and says, now the rabbis state that one may irrigate his field to the point that it is dripping wet before the poor collect his leket. And according to this opinion, we assess for the poor the loss that they incur, and the owner must compensate them for it. So Mara Fulda points out about this second part about the rabbis, that this phrase, because it is possible, means that it is possible to assess the damage to the poor. And according to Mara Fulda, the Gemara mentions that here, that this, that he mentions this here merely as an introduction to the question that comes and follows. So what is going to be this question? The Gemara asks, and to whom does he pay? Don't forget, the Leket belongs to the class of poor people in general. It doesn't belong to a specific poor person. So now the Gemara is asking, says, okay, now according to the rabbis, you want to go and irrigate it, and you want to go assess the poor, and you want to go assess, and the owner has to go compensate the poor for it. No problem. Who do you pay it to? How do you do it? It's a very good question. And the Gemara gives an answer. Rabbi Yonah says he pays the poor of the city. So the note here by the Vilna Gaon is that they are the ones who suffered the loss. The poor of other cities do not come to collect Leket, Shkicha, and Peah, and in fact, from the outset, they relinquish any claim to it, since they assume that the local poor will have already taken it. Thus, he gives the money to the local charity fund, whose administrator distributes it to the poor. That's the note by the Vilna Gaon on this. So the Gemara now wants to understand why this discussion was even necessary. So Sugya reads like this. It says, had Rabbi Yonah not taught this, what else could we possibly have said? Is it not obvious that the compensation goes to the local poor and none other? And the Gemara is going to answer it. It's going to clarify it. Rabbi Chia Bar Ada says Rabbi Yonah's teaching is needed to inform us that the payment to the poor is required by the measure of the law and not merely as a matter of virtue. Thus, the payment must be made to the poor of the city. So a lot of times in Halacha, people come along and they say, I'm doing this because I'm virtuous. I'm doing this because I'm good. And Rabbi Yonah's point, and the necessity of Rabbi Yonah's point here, is to say, that's very nice that you're feeling good and that you want to do it, but it's not done by virtue. It's done by necessity, because that's the law. That's the halacha. That's why it has to go and be made to the poor of the city. I want to get a point here by the Mara Fulda, and he's going to say that according to the first approach, since the rich does not actually, I want to go back to this case of like a rich traveler, and that's going to be coming up in the next Mishnah. And you have a rich traveler who's coming up. He's forced to take Leket and Shkicha and Peah and Meiser and then he returns home to repay the poor. So Rabbi Eliezer is gonna rule that it can be understood two ways. That he ran out of funds on his travels, and the man for this period of time is halakhically defined as poor, and so he's allowed to take it. And nevertheless, since he's not actually poor, Rabbi Eliezer maintains that as a matter of virtue, he should repay the poor when he returns home. And that way there's no problem with an expense of the poor, and he's not accruing any benefit. So even when traveling without funds, the man is halakhically defined as rich, and he's not allowed by law to take things from the poor. So he may take them only in the form of a loan, which he is legally obligated to repay. According to one approach, says Amara Fulda, since the rich traveler does not actually owe the poor anything and is virtually and virtuously repaying gifts to avoid having benefited from the poor, he may make the payment to any poor person he likes. But according to the second approach that he took alone, he has to repay his lenders. Who are the lenders? That's the poor of the city where he took the allotments. So what Rabbi Yonah's point is here, and it's a little bit out of order because he's pointing to the next Mishnah, which didn't come yet. But okay, it is what it is. According to what Rabbi Yonah's point is, that it's not a matter of virtue that you can give to like any poor person. It's really a legal obligation and it has to go to the poor of the city. And by repaying the poor of the city, Rabbi Yonah is basically verifying that Rabbi Eliezer is going to consider the rich traveler legally obligated to compensate the poor for their loss, and thereby, if he neglects to make the payment, the poor of the city could actually sue him for it. And that's the point, is that this is not just a matter of virtue to this kind of loan, that it's a real obligation by halacha. And so we see here in this Mishnah a lot of themes. One is that really what the farmer should do, the choicest way to do this mitzvah, if he wants to come and irrigate this field and get ready for this quick turn, is he should spend the time to pick up all the leket and to put it on the wall so that he doesn't damage any of the leket. He can go irrigate it. But if that's not possible and he's doing a light watering so that he's not really damaging the field, then then there's some damage to the leket, and he has to compensate some of the leket to the poor person. So in other words, but unless that irrigation, the value of that irrigation would be, by not doing it, would be greater. So if it would be greater, then actually he's allowed to deduct the leket from the poor people. And there's another theme that comes up here. What happens if the leket doesn't get picked up for a week and the poor people just ignore it? Well, it's the same case of the oleos of what Rabbi Kanievsky pointed out, which is that you're allowed to proceed with your harvest and your work cycle, so that your work cycle can, and the value of delaying your work cycle can end up nullifying the value of the leket. But that said, what if it's all done on the same day and poor people are coming out and you need to water it to start turning it? Then what do you do? In any case, if you're doing something where you're in a case where the value of the leket is greater than the loss of time for not irrigating the field in an afternoon, then by measure of law, you have to compensate the poor people of the city, and they can actually sue you for the loss, and they can win, and they'll win. So anyway, that concludes chapter 5, Halacha 3. Thank you so much.